here we go. Being the brave women that we are. So Sophia Leva Marie, my beautiful, precious friend, thank you so much for joining me in the shame-free zone to take on this difficult, but actually very inspiring topic about how we recover from incest. And before we dive into that, I really want to read your amazing bio and let people know that this is actually going to be a magical time, that it's not all doom and gloom, because Sophia and I are living wonderful, thriving lives. And so we're bringing a lot of joy and hope to this conversation. And when you hear her bio, you'll get some sense of why that could be possible. So my friend Sophia is the permissionary for visionaries. It's different names, I love it. Who desire to conceive of and receive what wants to be birthed through them, whether those are babies or business abundance codes or earth wisdom, body magic and miracles, or themselves as more divine. What could be better? Sophia takes her background in logistics management and corporate sales training, as well as thriving past trauma and abuse, marrying that foundation with spirituality, sexuality, and divine love, my favorite trinity, to challenge everything you think about yourself, your reality, and your business. She invites you to step into the conscious and fabulous being you already are, and to live and to leave the legacy of divine love you were born for. So this is one of the reasons I love you. You actually, before we dive into this topic of incest, I just want to give people a sense of what kind of miracles you can create for yourself. Because I know at one point you were very, very sick. And am I right that almost close to dying?
Yes, I actually had a doctor give me 2 weeks to live. And wow. First of all, my response to that was literally, well, shit. But there was no energy behind it. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I wasn't anything. I was just like, well, shit. And then, after I got a little past that, I was like, okay, I have to actually decide here. Like, I have to decide if, okay, 2 weeks, it's been real, like, I'll see you next lifetime, or if I wanted to go through the process of healing. And obviously I chose that because this year will be 10 years since that proclamation.
Well, that doctor was wrong, wasn't he?
Well, technically he was right in the state my body was in, but we always have choice. So yeah, I overrode.
You overrode fate. How did you do that?
Well, first it began with the decision. Again, it's always a choice. I could have accepted his diagnosis. I could have accepted the state my body was in and just been like, well, okay. Or, I had to marshal my choice. I had to marshal my energy. I had to talk the doctors into treating me. I had to sign a million things, even past the usual, if we kill you, sorry. I had like much more to sign. And then I actually had to go through the process of like, I'm staying, I'm going to heal, I'm not going to do this again, because I knew that, this, though it was physical, it was emotions that had coalesced into a physical symptom. So
say more about that, because I think my body evidences symptoms based on emotions. In fact, I think I can say that with confidence instead of saying I think. I absolutely do. I mean, like last week I got woken up like at 4 o'clock in the morning and I had this horrible gut ache and I felt like I was going to throw up, and I knew I had to write out some things that I didn't want to look at and deal with. And then I was like, okay, that's enough. I'm going to go back to sleep. And oh no, nope, more nausea, more gut wrenching. So I had to write for like another 10 minutes and then I was fine and I went back to sleep.
Yes.
So how does someone know? I mean, that was an obvious example for me, but I'm just wondering, how did you know to trust that this was emotions?
Mm-hmm. Well, by the time this happened, I had already been in energy and somatic modalities for about 4 years. So I knew, but, I was kind of bypassing that, like, oh, I'm doing the healing work, it's enough. And when the doctor came to me, I had about a quarter blood volume, which the doctors were like, how are you functioning? How are you walking? All of this. And I know it was only because I was doing pranic healing every day at the time. So that's how I was as functional as I was. And then I literally had these baby-sized head tumors. And I actually keep the picture to remind me, because it was all of the anger, the hurt, all of those emotions that I'd stuffed and suppressed, didn't say, for decades. I had just stuffed myself with this, held it in, and it literally, you stuff those things in. So it's like I was just packing it in and packing it in and packing it in. And then it created these huge tumors. And just being aware, I was like, what are they? And it's like everything you haven't wanted to look at, everything you were trying to just, again, bypass, like, okay, I'm doing the work, all of that, but I don't want to look at, the past. So that obviously wasn't working. So then I had to, part of the healing path was like, okay, I actually have to look at the shit I don't want to. And there's a lot of it.
Well, that's often a position that I'm in, not wanting to look at certain things. It's interesting with me. I'm very eager to look at my side of things and stuff I can take responsibility for. I really learned that in the 12-step program, like, own my side of the street, make amends, take responsibility, work on me. The part that I have a hard time with is looking at the ways in which I feel hurt or damaged or harmed by other people. A lot of times I'm always negating that, saying it doesn't matter, it's not a big deal. And, on our topic, so I'm kind of segueing here, I know that this is really one of the patterns of an incest survivor, because the perpetrator, who in my case was my father, is definitely trying to convince me that, first of all, it's not happening, I'm imagining it, so I'm crazy. And then if it is happening, it's not harming me because he's my father and he's incapable of hurting me. Just the kind of bullshit that he tried to pass off on me in order to continue to abuse me. And if you're raised in that, and that's the soup that you grow up in, there's a way in which you just get used to negating your own perceptions and feelings and always taking responsibility and blame. I'm wondering, I'm kind of speaking in general terms here. I know this affects lots of incest survivors, but I'm just wondering, do you identify with that, or did you have a different journey with incest?
No, absolutely. I mean, well, interestingly enough, when the incest with my father, it happened at age 8. I have people who've asked me, did it happen more than once? I can't actually answer that because I actually have like huge pieces missing in my childhood. And I literally, created all these physical symptoms. I had, by the time I was 11, I had been diagnosed with insomnia. I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia, and I would black out. Literally, hear no evil, see no evil. I created all of that.
Yeah.
Through years of this, and it wasn't until my 30s, I was actually, in a deep study on my Magdalene path, and it came out that it was my father. Like, I knew I had experienced sexual trauma at 8, but I didn't know that it was my father. So it took, almost 30 years to have that awareness, and that so much made sense.
Yeah.
And when I told my mother, previously, years before that, I had experienced something, she's like, oh, you're making that up. things like that. So, it wasn't a safe place to express. Like, it wasn't my words, my energy wasn't accepted. So I just learned to deal with it. And again, I learned by stuffing it. I learned by doing the things to fit in and doing what I wanted at the same time.
Well, I went to my mother when I was 15 and I told her that my dad was fondling my breasts and my sister's, the 13-year-old sister's breast, and that we wanted him to stop, but we couldn't get him to stop. And my mother's response was, "Oh, I'm sure he's not doing that intentionally. He's just got really large hands."
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and thanks to her not calling that stuff out, and she says she tried to confront him by telling him to be more careful because little girls are sensitive. By the time that that same year, 13 and 15, I'm 15, and he raped my sister. So it was, for me, it was just so traumatic to, it was my original gaslighting. My original experience with gaslighting was having my parents tell me that there was no sexual assault going on in our home. Yeah. And as you can imagine, Sophia, this really set me up to be susceptible to gaslighting from the men that I dated. I'm wondering, right, did you ever experience that?
For me, I didn't actually start dating. Well, I mean, I kind of had a boyfriend at 16, but, in the Jehovah's Witness religion, I mean, you go out with friends and that's it. So it wasn't really that. It wasn't until I was 19 that, I fell in love with someone 10 years older, and that at 21 was when I left the religion, and I experienced a rape directly after. You have that imprint of the sexual trauma, so it attracts more. So I experienced that. And for me, I was livid. I just was like angry at everyone and everything. So I didn't allow myself to be gaslighted. I used sex as a weapon. So I went on the offense.
Oh, wow. Wow. Yeah. No, I blamed myself. And same thing. I was raped 3 times. I got to where I felt like I just had something all on my forehead that said incest survivor. Because all they had to do was say the kind of words that my father used to say to me, and I would just become a lifeless lump that they could do anything they wanted with. It's really, really hard to get past that. Sophia, so since you didn't remember that it was your dad, you knew you'd been sexually assaulted at 8, but you didn't remember that it was your father until later in life. I'm just wondering, did you ever confront him? Was that part of your healing journey? It is for some survivors.
By the time that I, recalled that it was him, my parents had been talking to me for years. So it was actually maybe several years into it, I wrote him a letter, and I didn't directly state it, but I told him that I forgave him. And that had, of course, been years in the making and many layers and all of that. But yeah, I didn't specifically say you did this, but I did forgive him in the letter. Whether he read it, I don't know.
Who knows? Yeah, but we write those letters for ourselves. I know I wrote angry letters to my father, telling him what he had done and what the impact it had had on me. And knowing him, I'm pretty sure he read them, but of course he never replied. And by that time, when I did that, I'd been disowned by my father. So I wasn't risking the relationship. There was no relationship. I'm wondering, you and I have done several stories on sacred rage. And, really trying to help people understand you can't get to forgiveness until you really tap into your sacred rage. Can you tell us a little bit about those layers that you went through before you were able to forgive your dad?
Mm-hmm. Well, we're not given permission to have our feelings. It doesn't matter if you're a man, it doesn't matter if you're a woman in society. We're not given permission to fully express. You know, if you're a man, you're supposed to, you know, just like man up and not feel it. And if you're a woman, you're supposed to, you know, just be with it and be quiet and, you know, be more of like the doing things for other people. So we're not given permission to have these feelings. So first of all, it was actually getting in touch with it, you know, and through my years, you know, before I found energy work and somatic work, you know, I just, you know, was continually shutting myself down and shutting off. I was shutting off my sexual energy. I was, you know, shutting people out. I was, you know, using drugs. I was using, you know, all these different things. Actually, the drugs actually was a good thing for me. Because, you know, I had all these voices in my head, and I wasn't aware until years later that I was hearing bodies and I was hearing the earth, and I was just super aware. And it wasn't until I found cocaine that I had quiet in my head. So that actually gave me some peace. So it was like, I actually, you know, could touch that peace. And I was like, okay, there's something I can touch. I can have the peace. So years later, I found, you know, meditation and things like that. And, you know, it actually took several years because a lot in the coaching industry and then the healing industry, they come from it as you're broken. So I spent a ton of money and a ton of time and a ton of work trying to fix myself, trying to, you know, prove I wasn't broken or trying to heal that part. And it wasn't until, you know, I came to the realization that I'm not broken. And I actually created my first coaching program, which was called Enough Coaching, which was I am enough, you are enough, and enough of being told you're broken. That was that I actually began to, okay, if I'm not broken, what do I need to just, you know, let go of? So it was letting go of the emotions that I wasn't allowing myself to have. So I began to, you know, access those different ways, like access the anger, access the grief, access the pieces. And it wasn't easy.
Yeah.
You know, because when you spend years turning that off and years being told it's wrong to have these emotions and it's wrong to express them, and oh, you might hurt someone if you have them, you know, we're conditioned to not have them. So like even accessing them was a process and allowing myself to have them. And, you know, in the Sacred Rage series that we've been doing, we were talking about how there's different levels. It's like there's the anger, and the anger covers grief, and the grief covers the sacred rage, and the sacred rage is where your power is. So it's like when you access these things, when you access the anger, you can access the grief underneath it. And when you access the grief underneath it, then you can access your power underneath it.
Yeah. You know, you and I both were raised, actually born into Christian cults. And I know that the cult that I was raised in was really adverse to any kind of meditation or any connection you could possibly have with your own intuition or a higher power. I'm just wondering if that was true for you too.
No, I don't even think anything around meditation. I've never even heard of meditation before. You know, I don't know what said, like it wasn't a thing, but definitely with intuition. I mean, how I was brought up is you're not to think for yourself. You do what you're told. You do what's in the Bible. You do what the elders say. You don't ask questions, which was not great for me because I question everything. And, you know, if you have questions, just do it. Like, so that wouldn't even have been something intuition. No, it's definitely not, you know.
Yeah, so I was taught to be afraid of anything like that. It was always the devil talking to me. And it was, I had a different journey with drugs and alcohol. One of the things that I did was, and I am also grateful, by the way, I went into alcohol, I went into cocaine, cigarettes. For me, it was what kept me from committing suicide. Because when my father first started perpetrating when I was 5. By the time I was 11, I was depressed and suicidal. And at 15, I discovered drugs and alcohol, and I was like, I finally had a reason to live. And a way to live that was comfortable in my body. But I got sober at age 25, for which I'm super, super grateful. I've been in 12-step recovery now for over 35 years. And my experience of that was, how do I deal with the part of me that is sometimes has intuitive or psychic experiences without being frightened of it or pushing it away? Is that something that you relate to?
It was, but again, I had so shut off everything. Again, it wasn't until I was 30 when I found energy modalities and somatic modalities. And, that part of me was turned on again. I was like, oh my God, I did know. I knew at 12 and I knew it, 6, and I knew when the adults were lying and all of this stuff. I could look back and think, oh, I did know. I could see, I had an experience at age 12 when I was supposed to go with friends and their parents to an amusement park. Yeah. And there was just something that felt wrong about it. And again, I don't have any compass. I can't talk to anyone about it. So it was just so loud, though, that I chose to pretend I was sick to not go.
Yeah.
Because it was so loud. I didn't know what it was.
This intuition you had was so loud.
Yes. And I didn't know it was intuition until, again, years later. But what happened is a semi hit their car, and one of the parents died and one of the children died.
Oh my God.
So had I not listened to that, I either could have been seriously harmed or dead. And I had multiple things like that. But again, I didn't have any framework for it. I couldn't talk to anyone about it. And it wasn't until I found, things around energy and intuition that I was like, I did know. Oh my God.
Yes. And there's so much that we do know. And as a child, when I was 5 years old, I knew my dad was messed up. I knew he was doing bad things. And then by the time I hit 8, I forgot and thought he was God and couldn't do nothing wrong. And then by the time I was 9, I went back to realizing, oh no, my dad's really messed up. So it's amazing how a child oftentimes bonds to the parent who's abusing them in order to survive. And one of the ways that we bond, of course, is to enroll into that person's belief system. Mm. You have several times mentioned energy. And I know from my own healing journey that a lot of physical things like rolfing, Reiki, body work, but it's working with energy has been really important for me. And also my own sacred sexual journey, which is very energetically oriented, has been very healing for me. Can you speak a little bit about what you have pursued and brought to yourself in order to heal yourself of tumors, to heal yourself of incest? What role does this energetic modality play for you?
Oh my God, it's my North Star. When I was 30, I'd always been an avid reader, and I read the book Louise Hay, You Can Heal Your Life. And I was like, that's really interesting. I'd never heard anything about energy and how it can manifest in the body. And I had actually already been really fascinated with bodies. I actually thought I would have been an ER surgeon because I did multiple internships around bodies when I was looking at colleges. But I was just like, that's super interesting. So I found that book, I read that book. And then randomly, 2 days later, she had It was actually one of they still had the phone seminars back then, you know, like one of the ones you'd call into and listen.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yes, right. 800 numbers and 900 numbers.
So I called in and I listened to that. And then there was another couple the next day, and their talk was everything is energy. And they hosted, or they offered, a 40-day immersion. So I'm kind of a, you know, extremist person. I'm either all in or all out. And I was like, okay, this is interesting. $1,800, 40 days? Sure. No idea what the hell it is, but yes. I don't know what it is, but that. And that was just the beginning. And then I just started consuming, you know, Reiki and theta healing and access consciousness. And, you know, I dare say I've probably studied, you know, around 100 modalities around energy and somatics, both for my personal use. And I like learning and I'm interested. I'm like, well, what else can you do with that? Like, if you can do this with it, can you do that with it? I want to try this. You know, it's fascinating.
Well, you also bring it to your clients, do you not?
I do. Yes. So, you know, when I first started, it was like the hands-on. You know, I was working with chronic healing quite a bit at the time. So it was like that modality. And then when I got sick, you know, I again was still out of balance. You know, I was again bypassing, but I was doing everything else. I had everything on my to-do list, including the healing and serving and being of service. I was doing all that. And when I came out of that, I was like, okay, I need to do things differently. I need to do business differently and relationships differently and healing differently. So then I was like, how do I put this in a framework that actually works for me, that actually, you know, charges me and, you know, instead of depleting me, how do I actually, you know, have access to more energy instead of using my own energy? And so then I went on this quest of like creating something that could work for those. And originally when I went into coaching, you know, I wanted to work with kids who had trauma and abuse, because my thought was, why not get them when they're 5 and 8 and 11 and 15, you know, before they create ways of being and before they create corresponding, you know, experiences. And I was like, why am I never working with kids? I was working with these adults and entrepreneurs and coaches.
Yeah.
And what Spirit showed me is that I was working with the child within the adult, because when there's no healing, you're still acting from that place.
Oh, yes.
Create ways of being, you create your relationships. So there's a 3-year-old running the show, or a 6-year-old, or a 12-year-old, and they're still having the adult experiences, but you're still relating from that place. You know, one of the biggest things I've learned is, yes, we are not victims. We've been victimized, yes, but we're not victims. And you can't bypass the part of you that was victimized to not be a victim, which is often where we miss the mark, because we're like, I'm not a victim. And you try and gloss over.
I'm not a victim and I have forgiven them and it's in the past. And no, it's not.
It does not work, because that part of you still needs the healing. That part of you still needs the nurturing. That inner child part of you, or whatever age, they still require that. So you can't bypass the part that was victimized to not be a victim.
So true. I know when I first got sober, I wrote my father a letter and I said, I forgive you. And then I continued on with therapy as an incest survivor and realized, oh man, I am so pissed at you. And then I ended up having to tell him how angry I was. And, but you know, I brought him into my journey in the beginning. He wasn't wanting to be a participant. So at some point, he's just not really part of my journey. I just keep working it through therapy and support groups and other incest survivors. Thank God for all the people that have come into my world to help me heal. And by the time my father died, which was about 5 years ago, I was still disowned. So I really do know how to, I have some sense of the whole disassociation thing because my father had his own brand of it. But I moved heaven and earth to make sure he'd have a phone call with me. I almost had to trick him into it because he was so averse to talking to me. And it was a really sweet phone call. He only allowed 12 minutes, but I got to tell him that I love him. And he told me that he loved me. And, you know, to me, we have to earn the right to forgive. I think there is too much bypass, and there's a lot of pressure, particularly on women, but no doubt on all of us, regardless of our gender, to bypass our rage, to bypass self-care, to bypass standing up for ourselves and calling out perpetrations and go straight into forgiveness. And I also see it on the other side too, which is just a lot of finger pointing and blaming and canceling without any path towards healing. Like, how do we get to healing for everybody? But I have to say it was really special to me to be able to tell him that I love him. And I had forgiven him years before. And the reason I had forgiven him was because I had healed myself. But the way through there was to get through my rage and to honor my rage, respect it. So I'm wondering, what are some of the guidelines that you could share with the viewers about how they know they're bypassing? Because that's not always an easy thing to tell.
Yes. Well, it's in your life. Your life is actually the mirror. So if you can't let someone fully in to love you or to love them, if you keep hitting even an income ceiling, there's something there. If you are I'm trying to put this into words because I'm getting more of a picture, but it's kind of, there's an underlying kind of like seething energy, that's underneath. You may say one thing, but underneath there's a little, kind of crunchiness that's underneath your interactions. If you're still getting triggered, if you can look at that person and if you tense up, if you're, you get angry, if you are maybe interacting with someone else and you're triggered by that and it has nothing to do with them, there's this cardboard cutout because you haven't healed that place. There are so many ways to bypass, and it has to be healed. Often we're told, as you said, we should forgive, we should just go for the thriving, but you can't just jump the field.
You can't.
You have to do the healing first, because otherwise you're going to get pulled back. It's like that rubber band. Okay, you may create a certain level of success, and then you'll get snapped right back because you haven't healed that. Or you'll get in a relationship and something will happen. For instance, I was in a partnership actually when I first came to Hawaii, and I was laughing about this because I had just done a retreat on Maui about trusting love.
Right.
So I fly from Maui to Kauai. I land on Kauai. I'm in the Uber. I'm talking to my partner, and he says that he cheated on me. I was like,
no!
Okay,
Oh my gosh!
okay.
Oh my god! Great timing. Maybe he thought it was safe. I love it when they throw stuff like that at you while you're in a car or a restaurant, hoping the hell that you don't deck them, I think.
And I was just like, okay, trusting love. And I had a retreat the next day with a client. I was like, okay, I don't really have time for this, but okay. But I had to look at, okay, where do I still have the betrayal energy in my field with the most important person in my life? So I had to do more healing on that. I didn't know that I had that piece, but it showed up in my life to show me there was still, a shard of energy that was still there.
Yeah.
And, once you heal that, then, you move into a different type of relationship and okay, what's still being triggered? Okay, here's another layer for me to heal. It's like,
Yes.
you don't get like the whole pie. You don't be like, okay, we're just going to do this like 30 days. We're going to just like knock this out and be all, it doesn't really work that way. I mean,
one of the things I say about incest, I go, it's a gift that keeps on giving, because no matter how many layers I pull off, it's like eventually I'll reach some homeostasis. It's like, oh, this is great. I feel like I'm healed now. Everything's fine. And then there'll be another layer that I have to take to therapy and I have to process. Sophia, I wanted to add a thank you for helping us understand some of the ways we bypass it. I wanted to add a few things that I pay attention to when I'm looking to see if I'm bypassing. One is any kind of eating disorder, whether I'm eating obsessively or, in my case, oftentimes just not eating obsessively. So I can run off of my adrenaline and avoid even being in this body. And also, I think workaholism, like I'll just work and then I won't have any feelings. Inability to play, because I was abused at such an early age, it's difficult for me to play. And yeah, God, we missed our childhoods. You and I are going to have to get together. I'll fly down to Hawaii and we will just play.
That sounds good.
It's going to happen. So those are some of the things. And then of course, any kind of substance abuse can be a way of avoiding feelings as well. And I think like if you're just living in your anger, then you're never getting to your grief. So, maybe we should help people understand when we're talking about sacred rage, we're distinguishing that from acting out anger. These are different things. Did you want to say a couple words about that to help people understand what we mean when we're talking about sacred rage?
This is something that, when we were looking at the Sacred Rage series last year around racism,
yes,
and I was like, okay, what are some examples of sacred rage? So, the interesting examples that came up to me were, one, I'll give one that's religious. So Jesus in the temple, when there were money changers,
yes,
and he knocked over those tables and said, "Not in my Father's house."
yep.
And it was like, oh, I'm just gonna knock that over. Like, not in my Father's house. Like there was power behind it, like, not in my Father's house.
Yeah. And
then the other, kind of picture that came up was a mother who a car has landed on top of her child. And there's this inhuman strength that she gets to lift that off of her child. Like, this is not going to happen.
Yeah.
And then the third picture that came, it was actually a picture on Facebook, and it was in some African country, and you see this mother and her son's on the ground. She's surrounded by police and she's holding a machete to one of the policemen's throats. And like the energy is like, you're not gonna fuck with my child.
Yeah.
So there's a presence of power. It's not, acting out. It's very solid. It's very decisive. It's very precise.
And it's in service of what's right. So, and oftentimes, like the examples you brought up are like things that are harming a child.
Mm-hmm.
I help my clients contact their inner child, and then I want them to become kind of like a mother bear to their own inner child. So they are a fierce defender of that child's space and that child's safety. That to go back and do for that inner child what was not provided for the physical child when it was actually that age. Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
And it's so powerful. Now I have little reminders around the house. So the part of me that sometimes tries to starve my poor little inner child, I have a cue now, which is that I look at this house plant that I have habitually not watered in time. And I go, does that house plant look like it needs some water? So I'm trying to train myself to pay attention to living organisms need water and food.
Veronica, help me.
I'm trying to translate that to myself. It's not always working, but I'm getting better at it. Yeah. And then when it comes to play, I have an iPad I keep next to my bed. And I'm sorry to say, this is when I make time for it, is before bedtime, but I bring up this app that I have for drawing pictures. And a lot of it's childlike. I'm just like finger painting. So learning to do something I didn't get to do as a child, because finger painting got your fingers dirty.
Right, yes.
Yeah. Did you have that too? Don't make a mess?
Yes. Yeah, I translated that into OCD.
Yes, oh, me too. Of course, I come by it genetically too. I haven't been officially diagnosed with it, but I'm kind of like a point away from having it officially diagnosed. And my father died with it. It was really a debilitating disease for him.
You know what really helped me is, the very first time I visited Italy, I went to Venice, and I had literally taken one step off a plane. So I have one foot on the plane and one foot on Italian ground, and my body just took this physical sigh. I was like, yeah. There's like this letting go of stress. So a year later, I got to move to Milan. And that actually really assisted in letting go of quite a bit. It's still there, but quite a bit less, because I literally got to be disconnected from the literal land and cellular energy and that field of where everything was triggered. And in Italy, they are about play and pleasure and connection and sensuality and living. And that so helped me, because, as you said, we didn't grow up that way. We grew up, very structured, and, not to play and to be serious and to do what we're told and to ignore what we're feeling and all of these things. So that so helped me. And these days, I connect specifically with people who have that play energy, because that's not my go-to. And I allow myself to stretch myself. Like, okay, I can do this, I can play, I can do this. And I also am, like you said, about fiercely, protecting that child. For me, when I talk to my clients, I talk about being ruthless with your energy, like ruthless with, what keeps me self-centered is what keeps me centered in my energy. And that's, saying no to things. That's
yes, which is very difficult. But it's also difficult sometimes to say yes to things like sex. And you and I both teach people about sacred sex. So I think we'd be remiss if we didn't touch into this, because it's very unusual for there to be discussions about surviving incest and moving into a celebratory, beautiful, expanded sexual reality. Is there anything you want to share about that?
Well, again, you have to do the healing, because again, like when I left the religion and then I had that rape, I became very promiscuous. And again, I was using sex as a weapon. And then of course I went the opposite way, because that's my personality, is I went celibate, of course, because that's what you do. If you're having a lot, you go the opposite way.
Right.
Then when I started to engage in it, I was like, okay, how can I create how can I like inch my way back into intimacy? So for me, the practice was oming, orgasmic meditation. I was like, okay, I can, move into intimacy, being touched, feeling, and really being in my feeling space and just receiving without having the hooks of relationship. And then I could start to add in people and situations and get to learn that our sexual energy, again, it creates life. And we're not talking about creating a child here. We're talking about creating our lives. This is our life force. This is our desires. This is our passion, our power. So when we're not using that energy or tapped into it, we're only at a fraction of our possibilities and our potential and our power, because we're, again, bypassing, something that's innately there. So when you actually access that, you can access more of yourself.
Yes, right on, exactly. To me, one of the things that I thought, I'm not going to let my father and the men who raped me take my sexual power away from me. That would be giving them too much power over me for the rest of my life. And, I want to enjoy sex, and I absolutely think that it is married to my spiritual path. And that it is where my creativity comes from. It's where my personal power comes from. It's where my connection to self. I oftentimes use self-pleasuring exercises actually to get myself connected to difficult emotions that I don't want to experience. I know that's kind of an unusual use of sexual stimulation, but I do. It helps me reach the tears. It helps me reach the rage. It helps me reach the place where I feel more powerfully connected to myself and more loving towards myself. And, it doesn't hurt to also have an orgasm as part of that. But I also think that the brain is very impressionable at the moment of orgasm. So if I can bring the things that I want to affirm, the things that I want to attract to myself into orgasm, I'm actually doing some of the most powerful creative visualization that there is. Do you have that experience as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it opens, as you said, those pathways. You're more open to everything. And that includes opening to the places we haven't been willing to see or willing to acknowledge. So again, sometimes those sexual experiences or orgasms, they do have tears, they do have anger, and it's all perfect. Like, allow yourself to have that. It doesn't have to look, the Maxim way or, I can't, Playboy way or whatever.
No, it doesn't have to be porn. It doesn't have to be a romance novel. It can be just a beautiful way to connect with yourself and also with the divine.
Yes, it can be sacred and messy.
Well, this is, I love you very much, Sophia, and I'm really glad we had this opportunity to connect around this. Well, for some people, it's a delicate topic. I like to think you and I are really bold and bodacious, and we found a beautiful path through the suffering into self-realization. Yes.
And, whether someone can relate to the particular experience of incest or if they've had something on whatever spectrum, like, you can take the gold from it. You can access the energy behind it. You can access the emotions underneath it. You can access the power that's there for you. So the experience doesn't necessarily matter. It's what you do with it and what you're willing to have and to receive with it. And if you just, first of all, make that choice that whatever experience, you're not going to let it stop there, that you're going to have the full breadth of life and experience and play and sexuality and abundance and magic and living there is. And yeah, it's going to bring up the things that are in the way, but that's perfect.
It is perfect because that's where your freedom lies. I always like to ask my guests, and even though you and I are very close, you are my guest today, and I want to ask you, What's the one question you wish I had asked you that I didn't ask?
One question I wish you had asked. I think what's coming up is the question would be, do I wish it never happened?
Great question. Okay.
Yeah.
What is your answer to that?
No, I don't. And again, it took me a long time and a lot of work and a lot of layers to get to the place where I can be grateful for every experience and every interaction and how someone else was in that and how I was, and let it all be perfect. I do believe that, you know, especially as leaders, we came to forge a path, and forging is under pressure. So some of these experiences were a lot of pressure. Yeah. And it also reminds me, I was actually on a plane and I was reading a book called Children of the Sun God. And it was this woman, she had gone on a safari in Africa and her party was attacked by white lions. And they survived, but she went on to have this shamanic experience, and then she went on to create actually a foundation for white lions and that. But there was a particular passage, and again, it had nothing to do with my father, nothing to do with anything, but as I was reading this, it struck me because they were talking about in how some African heritage, they believe that there is no prey and there is no predator. So, the analogy of like, if a lion kills a wildebeest or something like that, they have a soul contract, but there is no perpetration. So as I was reading this, I was literally on the plane and I'm reading this, and for whatever reason, my father popped into my head and he was like, there was no perpetration. And again, this is after many years of work on my body, on my energy, on my soul, that I could be hit with that and receive that, that there was no perpetration. He wasn't a predator. I wasn't the prey. We had a soul contract that was fulfilled. And for me to do the work that I required to do in this world, that forging of an experience like that was required. So I can lay that on the altar and be grateful for it.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I don't hold it the same way, but it might be similar. For me, I do consider it a perpetration, what my father did, but I don't label him as a perpetrator. Just as I don't like to label myself a victim, I'm really kind of moving away from these labels. I like to call out, this is surviving and this is perpetrating. And in my reality, we have all perpetrated in some fashion. Certainly, I've never committed an act of incest or sexual assault, but we all have perpetrated. And when we start labeling people and we start canceling them, and then there's no way to heal all of us, there's no way to heal the culture. And I am so wanting us to heal individually, but also as the human family. So in that way, I think the way I hold it is compatible with the way you hold it.
And it's all perfect. Whatever way you hold it, whether you agree with me or whether you agree with Veronica or whether you say neither of you,
right?
It's all perfect, because again, we're at different journeys. We're at different levels of the path. We're at different levels of truth, and my truth is different than your truth, and my truth today is different than my truth 5 years ago or 10 days ago or that. So it's all perfect, whatever way you hold it. It's just, don't hold it so seriously and let yourself expand from it.
That's like my my version of a higher power. It started off as an old white guy with a beard, and then it turned into a woman, a goddess, and the next thing I know, it was a hermaphrodite. And then I decided my higher power was a council of people, and I didn't care what their gender was. And now I really don't care. I just work with the divine because it works with me. Um, so yeah, we all go through stages, and I think when we're working with concepts, it's so important to find the one that's working for us in that moment to help us advance our journey in a healthy, whole way. Sophia, how can people reach you so that they can get some of your amazing healing energy into their own lives?
Well, you have both on Facebook and Instagram, Sophia Leva Marie is the way you can reach me. Or you can connect to Veronica and just ask for my information.
Well, there's that. I'll be posting all the links below this video, so no worries, but I sometimes kind of like to give me an opportunity to call it out too. Yeah. Thank you so much. There's not very many people I could have a joyful conversation about being a survivor of incest with, and I just feel so much sisterhood with you.
Yes, thank you for having me, and thank you for inviting me into this conversation and this space, and yeah, for whoever needs to hear it at whatever time.
Yeah, it may create some waves of healing for us and other people. Yeah,
absolutely.
All right, sweetheart. Well, I will talk to you soon, I'm sure, but we'll say bye for now.
Yes. Hello.
Bye.